Now it's working. Thank you, Joe.
Everything that I want to do. So I said I'd do one session on 14th century German folklore, and then we could do a session on Cold War tanks. They then told me, maybe let's do it on getting current again after jumping and becoming an instructor instead. So that's what we're going to talk about. The hope is that this can be a very much like a discussion rather than anything else. I have prepared a bit of a PowerPoint. It's not much, but just to sort of give people some bullet points. So I'll just go back to sharing my screen again, which seemed easier a minute ago. All right. So what we wanted to talk about today was, sorry, that doesn't change, doesn't update the slideshow as I do it. There we go. So so what we wanted to talk about today was what people sort of need to do or should be doing in order to get back into the air after a period of uncurrency, which we're all having. And then the second part of this, we'd like to talk more about, once we do get back into jumping, what we can do to be able to get more out of the sport, like to be able to get more enjoyment out of it, and yeah, just essentially kind of get more bang for our buck in terms of jump tickets. So joining us in the second half of this, a group of people who have all sort of followed niche roles through the drop zone and sort of by volunteering and getting ratings, and they're going to share with us what their experience of sort of following the rabbit hole of skydiving a little bit further than just turning up on the weekends and just doing random fun jumps. And they're going to talk about what they put into that, and in turn then what they've gotten out of that. So we'll chat with a few of those people later on. But first of all, just wanted to talk about getting back into the sport. So I think the first thing we need to talk about is how uncurrent have people actually become. So what do we think? Let me get rid of that kind of cheating. What do we think are measures of uncurrency? What do you think makes you uncurrent? What time period? Ah, interesting. So, for example, sorry?
I would suggest not jumping after maybe a month or two.
A month or two, yep. How many jumps a year are we sort of talking, would you feel comfortable calling yourself current with?
I know I jump around about 50 jumps a year.
Yep. Anyone else? Any advances on that?
Yeah, I feel uncurrent after a couple of weeks.
Yep. Yep, certainly. I mean, it's been 2.5 months here in Victoria. It doesn't look like it's going to get started again for at least, I don't know, another month or so. So, I mean, by the time 3.5 months have transpired, that's certainly the longest I've not jumped in close to 10 years. And for me, if I do anything less than 500 jumps in a year, I feel uncurrent. So there are quite a few different ends of the spectrum, but the results are kind of the same. Does anybody know if we have any measures in the APF of uncurrency or of measures we might take against that, like prescribed measures?
90 days.
90 days, Richard? Anyone else?
Wasn't it 3 jumps in a year or something?
6 jumps in a year to maintain your sporting license.
Okay.
Yep. But yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't jumped, if, for example, students haven't made a descent within 90 days, they need to be assessed by the DZSO before they can get back up into the air. I think realistically, most drop zones, if a student hasn't jumped within 90 days, they're going back into the classroom to revisit their ground training. You know, I think there are a few components to determining uncurrency, and it starts with, you know, what your overall experience level is. I think you can sort of generally sort of say, and with uncurrency, it's not a one size fits all. It's not an easy matrix you can apply to every individual. But I mean, it starts with, you know, what is your overall experience level? You know, an AF student who doesn't jump for 6 weeks is uncurrent. Somebody who has 10,000 jumps and does 500 jumps a year and doesn't jump for six weeks, the skill level won't necessarily drop off so much, and their risks really don't increase too much in that same sort of period. So obviously your experience level to begin with is a huge part of it. The next one is, were you even current to begin with? We stopped jumping in Victoria, well, pretty much everywhere, I guess, on like 22nd of March. And, a lot of us were jumping fairly regularly up until that time. It was our best time of year in Victoria to be jumping. But then conversely, you may have had people who were sort of only scraping the barrel before then anyway. So we need to be honest about where we were before we started jumping. Equally, something we really need to talk about is, what were your jumps like before this shutdown happened? Is that if you were barely scraping the barrel of currency to begin with, then this has done you no favors. We need to assess whether or not people, if you've downsized just recently, if you a week before the shutdown happened, you burned your old Sabertooth 150 and you put on a Katana 135 and you only managed to do 2 jumps on it before the shutdown happened, then your first jumps back are going to be a very different picture to a lot of other people. And you should probably tell your friends so they can video your landings. What other measures of uncurrency do you think we might have, or do you think you might see?
Did you want people to speak up, Tibbitts, or write it in the chat?
Oh, speak up, please. I thought that'd be easier.
Okay. I think it depends on how, like you said, how current you are in the first place, or how many jumps you have, to begin with. How long you've been in the sport might depend on how current you feel, or how much longer you can accept being uncurrent.
And also off the back of that too, Mike, is what type of jumps you've been doing. You might be current on tandem but not on sporties, or current on swooping and not on something else.
Absolutely.
Your confidence.
To me, the two areas are emergency procedures and canopy. To me, they're always the real safety things. So I would be thinking about my emergency procedures a lot, and I would be thinking about canopy and being aware, because I reckon your awareness will narrow down.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's it. I think if you're, it's simply if you become less used to a situation, then you're more aroused in the same situation, so you're less aware of what's going on around you. You'd be less able to deal with busy canopy traffic, or be attuned to the subtle cues that 6 months ago, when you're doing 50 jumps a month, you wouldn't have even acknowledged that you noticed. But now it's a very different story. You're unable to process as many inputs all at the same time, and to some degree you're in some level of sensory overload. Really the kind of the basic matrix basics of series we might run through is review what you know. So if you're a less experienced jumper, what options might we have available to us?
A license manual or B license manual?
Yep. Or maybe what else could you have done? Could you do?
Instructors.
What was that, sorry?
First jump exam.
First jump exam, A license exam, all of those sorts of things. Like it's obviously easy to know what you do know, but you don't know what you've forgotten. So something like that can be really, really valuable for making you sit down and think and reassess everything you've forgotten in the meantime. So then obviously we need to revisit what we've forgotten. And can anyone think of anything that might be useful in doing that?
I was going to say maybe hire a drop zone, if you're fresh, encourage people to hire a bigger canopy, not a bigger canopy as such, but a container with like a bigger canopy so you don't frap in.
Sure.
Well, you can frap in, but you'll frap in with less velocity.
Can I just make a comment, please, Michael?
Sure.
A few years ago, I had a shoulder operation and I was off jumping for 4 months. I still went to the DZ in the meantime and did DZSO and things like that. But my first jumps back, I got on a canopy course with Michael Vaughan. 2 reasons. One is to get up to speed with flying the canopy, and the other to exit without terminal opening. But it was really to get back into canopy, handling the canopy. And that's probably something that I know a couple of the DZs are going to do anyway. First jumps back, hop and pops. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, whether it be hop and pops or just maybe just pulling a little bit higher than you normally would. I know my first couple of jumps back, I'd be intending to pull it 4.5 or something like that for a couple, and just take it easy and just get used to the sensation again. You know, I think it's very, very important. Obviously, where we're going to hurt ourselves is under canopy, so that's something we do really need to dial back. You know, I think it'd be a mistake to be doing 2 seconds on your first jump back. Yeah. Anyone have any ideas for any other resources that might be useful for somebody trying to refresh their knowledge and see where they're up to? Particularly thinking for lower experienced jumpers.
Well, YouTube, the APF YouTube videos would help.
Yeah, that's it. So the APF have a really, really good cutaway or malfunction series available on YouTube. Something I think certainly students, but I think pretty much all jumpers would benefit something from watching that. You know, to not jump for a while is one thing, but to be completely removed from the drop zone for so long is, I think, something else. You know, most DZOs would see that with students that haven't been able to jump for some period, there's quite a distinction in the students who attended the drop zone but haven't been able to jump, but have at least observed operations and kind of been into the swing of it a little bit more, versus students who have just been completely away for the same period. So I think refreshing yourself with sitting down and watching and thinking about the parachute malfunctions is really, really a great start. Anyone have any idea what countries that have relatively regular periods of uncurrency do, like Nordic countries or countries that have really profound winters where people don't jump for sort of 4 or 5 months at a time?
Well, the US has Safety Day each year.
Mm-hmm.
And they cover a lot of material on those that are just really good, refreshing material, whether it's canopy work, going through emergency procedures from a different perspective, more from a physics or just a deeper understanding. And that way they get... or the people who attend tend to get a lot more or a much deeper understanding out of how their equipment works.
Yep, absolutely. Anyone else have any ideas? What was that, sorry? No. Yeah, so I mean, essentially there's not too much to it. I think if we're all more experienced jumpers, then we're maybe more readily able to make the decisions for ourselves. But with student jumpers, you know, a lot of people will be revisiting classroom components of their courses. AF students be going back, you'd assume, to go back to do at least the stage they did before the shutdown, or possibly even a stage 1 or a stage 2, and then revert to whichever stage they were up to in the AFF training table. What about gear? What do people think they should be looking at with their equipment before they go back to the drop zone?
Pull it apart and repack it. Get to know your gear again.
Repack mains?
Definitely.
Wearing it and actually getting used to where the handles are again.
Sure. Maybe even in your first jumps back, in free fall reaching for your handles, under canopy reaching for your handles. What do we think the consequences are of leaving a main packed for, let's say, 3 months?
I've just been repacking some tandems out at Bar, and they've got a brand new one, and it just literally clumped together in one big blob, and it would have been hard to come out, or taken a long time to come out.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, like to leave a main packed for 2 to 3 months isn't necessarily the end of the world. I mean, I think once you start looking at longer periods, or, you know, up to 12 months, you can really start thinking about rubber bands atrophying on brass grommets on D-bags or something like that. And I think if there was a risk that the last time you packed it, it was wet, or, you know, you packed it on dewy grass or something like that, that might sort of cause mold in the canopy and might be bad for it. But I think reasonably, if you packed it in dry, normal conditions, then hopefully after 2 or 3 months, it should still open. But at the same time, I think it would be, I imagine most people would be prudently packing their own gear again before they do a jump. What about the rest of it? What else do we need to be looking out for in terms of our equipment?
Reserve dates.
Monthly maintenance.
I beg your pardon?
Monthly maintenance.
Monthly maintenance, absolutely. What else should we think about?
Batteries of electronic equipment.
Absolutely, things like in your Neptunes or in your Audibles, like periods of unuse, the batteries may well be completely dead, and you may find yourself climbing through 1,000 feet, and all of a sudden your ditter isn't going off, which you didn't think about. So very much that's something to think about. What else do we need to be mindful of?
The size that we're jumping, if we're being on current?
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. I think that sort of comes back into the dialing it back a bit when we start jumping again. But as well, you know, just all of it really. I mean, if we're still not jumping for another month or so, it's a great opportunity to take our rig apart and do some maintenance on it, whether you need a new VOC or a new kill line or something like that. You'd obviously making sure your reserve is up to date. You'd feel pretty foolish if you came to the drop zone on your first day back after months and months off and your reserve was out of date. So yeah, just making sure that everything is up to scratch before we get back into the sport. Yeah. Anyone have any comments or suggestions?
Maybe how much you weigh, like if you haven't weighed yourself for like 4 months.
Yeah, with that gear that I haven't seen for a while.
Sorry, what was that, Elliot?
Oh, you haven't jumped for a while. Like, I know that when I'm jumping quite frequently, sometimes I see something that's a little bit worn, and after each jump, I tend to put that aside for a while. But point that you made, have a look at everything right now, because then when we go back to jumping, we're not going to have those that type of approach.
Sure, absolutely. Anyone else? All right, cool. So a couple of other things I'd like to talk about before we need to think about before we go back into jumping is there's a few new. Sorry. So there are a couple of new rules which have come through and were effective as of the 1st of April. What we're looking at is buddy checks. How do I move that? So the now before jumping, every parachutist must ensure they've had a check by another parachute APF member. So yeah, buddy checks, which a lot of drop zones will be doing anyway, have now been formalized. I think we can say the intent behind the rule was to leave it a little bit open that it's up to the individual jumper to check that they have that they've had the check done, rather than the DSO to ensure that it's been done, or the GCA to ensure that it's been done, or something like that. There are a few guides on the APF website about how to conduct buddy checks, but it's all sort of fairly straightforward stuff. It's really just inspecting the front of somebody's system, making sure their 3 rings are set up correctly, making sure their chest straps done up, handles are correct and safely secured, leg straps done up, that sort of thing. Turning them around, inspecting their pins, the AAD if you can see it, that sort of thing. It's just kind of giving somebody a proper once-over before they board the aircraft. It's very easy when you pick up your gear, you see what you're expecting to see, and when you throw it on your back, you're just doing it purely out of habit without really truly giving it an in-depth examination. So the idea of buddy checks, it's not obviously not an infallible system, nothing is, but it's another set of eyes glancing over your gear, and hopefully as well also adds a little bit of peer pressure to the situation, whereby you doubly make sure that your gear is correct, because you don't want somebody else pulling you up on it not being correct. But then I think probably the biggest change, and the one that I think has really, there's been a lot of work to put it into place, is that mains now need to be verified as compatible with the container by a Packer A or rigger. Now, apparently there's been a little bit of confusion about this since the emails went out about it. So is Trish here?
Yes, good evening.
Would you like to just talk people through roughly what this rule means, Trish?
I just draw people's attention to the article that went out earlier in the week, or probably last week, just identifying what we're actually looking at in regards to compatibility. That compatibility isn't, you're not just checking that the size of the main fits within the parameters of what the manufacturer states. We are looking at the fit, form and function, how it feels, how it looks, and it's not just ticking the box, because a main that does meet the manufacturer's guidelines in a container that might have been stretched previously could be not compatible. So I think people are thinking it's just ticking the box in regards to the size is the correct size. We actually need to do a visual and physical inspection. I guess that's what I just want to get on my soapbox about.
Well, and that's it. So it's not just a question of looking up that, yes, a Katana 107 is an ideal fit for a Vector 306, but yes, rather it's a genuinely tactile, hands-on, yes, this canopy is suited to this container. And in terms of the compatibility verification, what we're looking for is the minimum standard would be for the pack array at each repack to write a line on the reserve card saying, not broadly, mains of this size, but rather Sabre 2 135 is compatible with this container. Doesn't need to be, and Trish, please correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't need to be so specific as to be serial numbers or colors or anything like that, but it needs to be the make, the model, and the size of the canopy do fit this. So rather than just a 0P 170, rather actually a Sabre 2 170 is compatible with this container.
Yep, and that is the bare minimum. And I'm got a little bit of sand thinking that all people want to do is achieve the bare minimum. Sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox, but that's the bare minimum is to
your sandbox.
My sandbox, correct. The bare minimum would be a sentence underneath the reserve, like when you filled in reserve packing card. What we have here is an opportunity to really sort of step up as pack arrays and riggers. I'm getting on my soapbox, but to really provide a service to the people that we pack for, and look over the gear and check the gear and demonstrate that you have, and provide feedback to your customer in regards to what might be needing repairing soon, and sign it off comprehensively as opposed to just the next sentence on a packing card. But I'll shut up because I'll take all your thunder, Mike.
No, not at all, Trish. But I mean, I think it's important to note as well. Some people are sort of saying, well, this is onerous. Now you have to submit your main in with a reserve pack, and or if you change mains, then that will need to be approved. If you change mains out of sequence with a reserve pack, then that will in turn need to be verified by a packer A or rigger. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same one that packed your reserve. So if you do it at a drop zone, someone is able to check it and sign it off for you there. And obviously they're not signing off that the reserve is airworthy, they're just now signing off that the main, which they've examined with that tactile inspection, is airworthy. But at the same time, the kind of servicing requirements for people's reserves have gone from a minimum of 6 monthly to now annually. So at the same time, yes, each reserve repack now does become, I don't want to say more work, but it does involve more work. But at the same time, it's now only done once a year. So hopefully, instead of just being a quick pull it out, put a new closing leaf in and repack the reserve, it becomes a much more drawn out, sort of 3 or 4 hour inspection of the entire system, because it only needs to be done once a year.
Trish, Shirley Coucher here. I just want to ask, does that have to be specified on the packing card or on the inspection sheet that the packer A or rigger gives you when they do your rig?
There are a couple of options. So the minimum is that it's basically on the reserve card. But what you can have, I just posted on the screen here. Here's 2 examples that have been made up by one's by Crash from Nagambie, and the other's by a guy called Dan Carter from WA. And it's essentially just a little, one is just a basic main and model, suits the size of container, and it's a sticker for someone's logbook. And the other one is a small little bit of paper that's to go with your reserve card and be tucked away and handed over to the DSO when you do a gear check. But also, yes, you can use the P3 form too. So it doesn't really matter how it's documented, just as long as it is documented and the person with the rig can produce that documentation when it needs to be checked at a drop zone.
Mike, can I add something there?
Of course.
Just to respond to Shirley as well. Obviously, normally it would happen at the time of the reserve repack, but it can happen at any time in between as well. For example, if somebody wants to swap a main, they need to get it verified as compatible again. If that happens, obviously the reserve doesn't need to be repacked, but it can be done by a packer A or rigger at any point in between as well.
Thank you.
I mean, so this is the sort of the quest for ensuring compatibility has been born out of obviously an incident that happened a couple of years ago. But I mean, if we look and talk about some of the things that can arise from incompatible gear, and Brett Newman actually did a really, really wonderful on-hold session about this, which was posted on the APF page on the 9th of April. He spent an hour really talking about it, and it's really, really excellent. But for those of you who haven't seen that, if we're talking about a canopy that's too small for the container, what sort of consequences could we see? Anyone?
Premature opening.
Premature opening. Yep, that's obviously a big one. What else? What might we see?
Loose BOC pilot chute.
Loose BOC and pilot chute, which can in turn obviously equal a premature deployment. What else? Something else.
About 2 out. And about if you got 2 out and they're wrong size.
2 out. So yeah, if we're talking about incompatible mains and reserves, then I suppose that's a likelihood. Absolutely. What other sorts of things might we see as an issue with a canopy that's too small for a container?
Yeah, harder openings as well.
Harder openings?
Come out fast. I don't know.
We'll put that in the possibly pile. Anything else we can think of? All right. Okay. What about then the converse of that? So canopies that are too big for containers. What could be possible consequences of that?
You have a terminal reserve ride, it might, if everything's tight, you might have like a slight delay, which might result in badness.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe there was a fatality in Singapore about 15 years ago that was basically caused by that was an overstuffed reserve container, probably in I think in conjunction with an overstuffed main, and simply the pilot chute came out and nothing happened. And they went in at terminal. And I think that's why, you know, when we talk about doing a tactile inspection of the complete system, when we assess for canopy compatibility, even if the, you know, UPT, for example, might say that this is in the recommended size or this is in the firm size for the main, if that's in conjunction with an overstuffed reserve, all of a sudden an overstuffed main does become more of a problem. So even if UPT say, it kind of works, the other choices you made that go with it may preclude it being a proper choice, a reasonable choice. What else can we do with a main that's too big?
It could actually stretch your container, the flaps in the container.
Definitely, which in turn, over the long term, can damage and damage your container. Anything else?
Pilot chute and tow.
Pilot chute and tow. Yep, absolutely. If we go, here's a list. This is just a summary of the ones that Brett talked about in his session. And you can see there's literally nothing good on there, particularly if you look at all of the possible malfunctions caused by, or some of the malfunctions caused by mains that are too small. I mean, those are all genuinely quite catastrophic. You know, premature deployments, we'll obviously see what they can do. Loose BOC, you know, something that, one of the malfunctions I would take most personally as a tandem master who's up by the pilot with potentially 80 kilos of unhelpful on the front of me is somebody climbing out and having a premature deployment on the door and taking the tail off the plane. Like, obviously that makes life very, very difficult for absolutely everybody. And it's something that makes me quite uncomfortable. And sometimes you'll see it when you do gear checks. People will, the gear's not very free fly friendly, the BOC is a little bit loose, nothing's great, there's a bit of an exposed bridle, and they say, oh, well, I only do flat jumping. Well, that's great, but it's still, when you're hanging on the outside of the aircraft and your main flap is bouncing around in the wind, it's putting everybody at risk. When we then look at mains being too big, you know, we're talking about a hard pull, so just a BOC that's super tight, and even with your absolute best vegan strength activated, you may struggle to get the pilot chute out, or you may struggle to get the pilot chute out in a nice even body position. So you might sort of end up throwing yourself into line twist or something because you've had to exert so much force getting a pilot chute out. PC in tow, absolutely. Stretching the container, damaging that. You're increasing the likelihood of wearing out closing loops, which in turn, in consequence, one day are more likely to break. And yeah, overstuffed main can affect the reserve deployment, which, I mean, none of those are anything you want. And they're also not things that anybody else in the aircraft wants. So I think incompatible gear is like a really genuinely dangerous issue. And hopefully this, you know, this goes some distance to helping resolve it or help make life a little bit easier. So, and as well, this new rule, although it's come in at the 1st of April, so it's been in place for 2 months now, you're not required to have this until your next reserve repack. Is that correct, Trish?
Yes, correct.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any comments or questions about new rules or incompatible equipment?
Yeah. Some people use extensions on their own rigs to accommodate crew canopies and accuracy canopies. If we're going to do that, I presume that the packer A or rigger at the drop zone would be the one who would have to certify compatibility.
Absolutely. Trish, do you have any feedback for that?
Yeah, that's a conundrum that I've tried to address, the extenders. That aside, yeah, I would encourage, yeah, packer A or rigger to sign it off as compatible if you can find someone to do that for you.
Okay.
Maybe we should ban accuracy.
Need to address that extender.
Can I ask a quick question on the compatibility?
Sure.
you mentioned before that, you know, a lot of drop zones have been going to the size, what the manufacturer says and all that sort of stuff. So in reality, you're saying I can get a rig if I look at it and I see, check it out without looking at the compatibility of the mains with the containers and all that sort of stuff. I can sign it off without doing that, because if it looks compatible, it should be okay.
Trish?
Yes. Okay. What we're deeming is that you have the skill of either a packer, A, or rigger, and you have the training to recognise when something is compatible through your knowledge base. So there is opportunity for you to do that. To answer you succinctly, we can talk about it later if you like.
I just think because like some rigs have the still have the loops from the bottom of the container, and they're still compatible with a size smaller, possibly. You know, not two, obviously not two sizes smaller, but one size smaller, because they can still get it tight. Whereas opposed to a Talon, you just can't tighten it because it just comes up through the grommets.
Yes, if in your opinion you deem it to be airworthy, you can sign it off as airworthy. And if it's a bit grey, I'd recommend maybe just writing down, if you've done like a checklist or something, and it's possibly grey, write your reasons for, in your opinion, why you believe it to be compatible. Because if someone looks at it and then questions it, they can then see your reasoning why. I think that's just a nice kind of not butt covering, but a butt covering to explain why you've reached your opinion.
Yep, right. No, thank you.
Cool.
And I mean, obviously, there's lots of different reasons why it might be, but you know, you might have Dacron crew lines on your Storm 120 or something like that, and yeah, no, absolutely. Any other questions or comments on gear compatibility?
One little thing, Mike. I had Putsy come in the other day for a reserve repack, and being a competitive swooper, he had a number of canopies. And since I was aware that was happening, I modified the P3 form so that I could list a number of canopies on it and signed them all off as compatible for that system.
Sure.
Like we check through each of them, you know, it's all fine. But it's just that way he's got a bit of paper that he can show whomever at a drop zone that they have all been checked.
Yes, that's perfect.
And I mean, I think there's probably not too many people that do fall into that, but at the same time, I think it's a reasonably sized minority of people that might have wingsuiting canopies, or people might have their swooping canopies and then their day-to-day canopies. So absolutely, that's the perfect way to address that. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? All right, cool. So the second part of what I'd like to talk about tonight was for the hope that this session would reach a target of reach a kind of a younger or less experienced jumper audience, and something I wanted to talk to them about was how to get the most out of their sport. So rather than, you know, turning up at the GZ when you've got 150 jumps and doing more wagon wheels and zoo jumps and stuff like that, was, you know, how can you really entrench yourself in the sport more and get more enjoyment out of each jump that you do? And I think the first and the easiest answer, well, you know, I think most people see the whatever stage they're at jumping at the moment, they see the next stage of jumping as going and doing 10 hours tunnel in Poland, where, you know, they'll get the chance to learn about all glorious European history and maybe finally read War and Peace as well, except they get super drunk and they miss the last hour of tunnel and they lose their copy of War and Peace when some building burns down. But I think something that's really, really important for people to be able to do is simply just to learn more, to do their pack a B, whether they want to be a pack canopies at a drop zone or pack tandems is, you know, almost not even the point, but just to actually, even if they just sit through with a packer A or an instructor with a packer B who can do it for them, and sit through the knowledge component of a packer B exam and just learn how to make closing loops and all that sort of thing, like just to get a little bit more established in the gear that you're putting on your back. I think it allows you to take more ownership of what you're doing, and hopefully with that allows you to enjoy jumping more with more self-sufficient responsibility. Adding on to that was display ratings. If you can convince your chief instructor or your DZSO to help you do your display prorating, or actually even organize display jumps, maybe into a local footy oval or something like that. It's a pretty cool opportunity to have. Or if you can poke and prod them to do some of the training, which sort of should be around, but sometimes isn't really as laid out as it might normally be. So, for example, doing a course on how to be a DZSO at a non-training organization, which the single real prerequisite of that is being aged over 18 and having a D license. So it's something that's accessible to a lot of sort of medium stage fun jumpers, but I think really opens up their eyes to some of the responsibility and some of the things that are out there and some of the possibilities. Obviously, adding on to that, the next level above those sorts of trainings, we have coach ratings, as B-rails, free fly, wingsuit, canopy, and CRW. The next stage of that is obviously becoming an instructor. And I think sometimes now the paradigm in skydiving that we see is you're either a fun jumper or you're a full-time instructor. And I think it's important to note to a lot of fun jumpers that it's still very much possible to be a 1 weekend a month instructor, to be able to do AF, 2 or 3 days a month or something like that, and still contribute and still do a lot of jumps and still get to be current at doing it. Then we'd like to talk about joining a team, becoming a judge, maybe getting involved with the local council, and then sort of obviously at the top end of that is the option and the chance to be able to compete internationally. And so it's all easy to talk about this, but what we've actually done today is we've brought in people at every step on those bullet points who are at that level and can talk to everybody about what they've done, how they've gotten there, why they got there, what they do while they're there, and most importantly, what they get out of it, and really to help express to people that it's something that is accessible to every weekend fun jumper. So first of all, talking about coach ratings, we have a free fly coach, Elliot. Elliot?
Yep. Hey guys. Cool. I've been a free fly coach since October last year. And how I got into it was that I was going to a lot of the free fly camps in the Gambia and Barwon, and getting on all these free fly jumps. But in between the camps, be trying to jump with my buddies, and it was just trying to figure out how to do these jumps safely and carry things on from what we learned at the camps there. So that's when I started hanging out with some of the free fly coaches and just trying to learn more from them. And they really encouraged me to pick up a lot more in terms of learning what it is like to lead jumps, to plan jumps, and the safety around free fly jumps as well. So I pretty much got sort of like pulled into it that way, and I really enjoyed like the experience I was getting from that and learning from that. And so I was trying to pass that on with the people I was jumping with. I guess for me, it was a bit more of a gradual progression into that. What I love about it is that in free flying, there's like so many different elements that we could be learning and trying to perfect. So Mason always says to focus on one thing at a time and get good at that. And these camps were really helpful for us to do that. But we've found that previously they were a bit few and far in between. So I had this urge to contribute to seeing if we could have more of these as a regular thing. And so we've started doing that in the Gambia as well. We had a few of these angle camps too. The other thing I love about what I do in these is learning more how to plan dives, not just like the type of dives, but also understanding the different abilities and capabilities of each individual as well. And then trying to put my brain in a space where I can figure out what's a way for them to get the most out of learning in the safest controlled manner as well. Because for me, the safest jumps are the ones that are pretty much the fun ones, but unsafe ones are definitely not fun at all. That's most I could say about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Elliot. The minimum requirements to become a coach, obviously you need to be expert at what it is you're doing, but it also can start off with just D license. So someone hopefully with even 150 jumps, if you're looking at becoming a B-rail coach, obviously they need to be just more than just 150 jumps. They need to be fairly proficient, but at the same time, you can even start aiming for it around then by joining in on B-rails and hanging out with novices and taking part on their jumps to sort of learn how they are. And then hopefully at 200 jumps, if you do have the proficiency and perhaps some tunnel time and relevant experience, that you can start jumping with novices. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool way to start dealing with students. Anyone have any comments about coaches? So the next one I had was to become a weekend or a part-time instructor. The person I had lined up for that is unfortunately had to go out for dinner tonight, but they sent me through sort of a bunch of bullet points that they would like expressed for sort of how they feel about it. This is someone who they've done quite a lot of flat jumping, but when they had about 580 jumps, they went to do their AFF rating. They'd been a B-rail coach prior to this. That felt like they had lots of good mentoring from a couple of people at the drop zone, and eventually made the transition to becoming an AF instructor. They said the whole process from doing the course was incredibly challenging, exciting, really, really rewarding just in and of itself, even just getting the rating. But they say their favorite aspects of it are the joy of seeing student progression through not only through the AFF table, but subsequent to that as well in their development as skydivers. I know as an AF instructor, one of my favorite things genuinely is looking at somebody who has 400 or 500 jumps and is now an accomplished skydiver in their own right, and knowing that you had a, I don't want to say you had a part in that, but that you were a part of their development, like knowing you taught their first jump course, or you did all of their AF stages, or something like that. And then to see them as a, growing up and swooping or something like that is certainly one of my favorite things about being an instructor. One of my favorite things about skydiving in general, actually. But also this person suggested that teaching the skills to the diversity of people who turn up at drop zones. A lot of the people turn up for vastly different reasons. And the challenge in being able to teach skills and explain things in, complex and stressful environments to people to get it across in order to be able for them to achieve the basic points of the jump, to be able to assess them in free fall and give them feedback. And there's a point on most when you run through an AF table with somebody, there's generally one jump, whether it's like on a stage 3 or maybe a stage 4, where you let someone go and you're out flying in front of them and they've got this like frozen look of fear on their face and they're trying to turn, but their entire body is completely rigid. And then all of a sudden you manage to get them to smile, and you just see their entire body relax, and they go from being stressed and on the verge of overwhelmed for their entire AFF experience to suddenly relaxed and loving it. And to be able to be an AF instructor and to be able to be a part of that is just glorious. It's a wonderful part of the sport. From a slightly more pragmatic point of view as well, the person that I asked to speak says she, in a year, she does about 50 AFF jumps, which if you then roughly work out that you probably get paid about 1.5 times a fun jumping ticket per AFF jump, then 50 AFF jumps equals 75 fun jumps. So all of a sudden you've now done 125 jumps in a year at no net cost to you, which any fun jumper is going to be able to appreciate. That's a pretty cool way to get current and to be able to stay current for essentially no cost. And skydiving is expensive enough, and to be able to have it pay for itself is obviously a wonderful thing to be able to do. They also talk about the camaraderie of working on a drop zone and getting more into becoming part of the drop zone through work and responsibility, and working with other instructors and being mentored, and then in turn mentoring yourself is pretty cool too. And that's still something that very much exists. You can still be a part-time AF instructor or even Tandem Master doing one weekend a month. It is still something that's open. Anyone have any questions about that? The next one is something that I think is really, really important for new jumpers to be able to look at, or up and coming jumpers to be able to look at, particularly, once they get to about the 150 jump stage and you see their attention span starting to wander off. As I said, they've done enough zoo dives, they don't really know where to go next. And that is joining a team. So to talk to us about that, we have the great Merv.
Thanks, Mike. So in preparation for this, I kind of pulled out one of my first logbooks to figure out when I started jumping and joining the team and what I was doing at the time. And to my surprise, it was a couple of stitch fly jumps, some hop and pops, 7 ways, 8 ways, 3 ways. I showed up to the drop zone to meet my buddies, have a great time, did a couple of jumps and left. My first team got together. Basically, it was a group of mates who we wanted to jump together. We wanted to show up to a drop zone and guarantee some decent jumps. Didn't really matter what kind of jumps they were. It happened that there was a decent full-weight coach around the drop zone, and I know, like in Victoria, especially around the country, we have amazing coaches. I'm really, really lucky here in Australia to have all this talent. And thanks, Dublin. And that kind of became the habit of to, text your mates, get that camaraderie, as we talked about in the previous talks there, and have that expectation that we're going to achieve something. Like, show up. Doesn't matter if everything goes like nothing works out in the first jump, but things get better over time, and someone will tweak or someone will make a comment, and that sense of progression and that sense of working together as a group to achieve something, that is really what kept me in it, and what kept me going from building the teams in Ireland and going down when I moved down here to Australia to join teams and continue that progression. It was definitely a core to my skydiving, and I'm still great friends with a lot of my teammates. I'd highly recommend reaching out to a few mates. If you're struggling to find numbers, talk to a more experienced jumper on the drop zone. They'll often know someone else who maybe can help you out, fill in a slot, whether it's 4-way or 2-way crew. We have some amazing coaches down here. I'm a huge advocate for jumping in a team and everything that skydiving has to offer in that regard. Yeah, back to you, Mike, unless there are questions. And has Mike just frozen? He looks dashing. The light really suits him.
Are you reading the chat there, Merv?
No.
Someone wanted some subtitles.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. My. All right. Well, it looks like there's.
I was gonna say it's really cool to be able to, because I know you've just gotten into speed and understanding that there are so many different options when it comes to competing, and I know as more of an individual competitor, it's there's so many different options as well. When you are not having a team, you can still even though I'm not on a team, I feel like we've got a really cool speed team. We're all doing the same thing and running the same comp and having fun. So yeah, it's cool.
Absolutely, Jess. Yeah, I love it. And there's some really interesting parallels there. Working with, chose a group I'm going to use 4-way because that's where my background was from. We had a strong tradition of, getting a coach in for the day, getting a camera, really isolating our jumps. And I see there's a lot of strong correlations with that in speed skydiving, where it's just not feasible for one person to get a coach for one-on-one, but we as a group have discussed it, and we talk about getting those coaches and kind of pooling those resources. It's each discipline, whether it's a solo discipline or a group, has its own challenges. But especially for the younger audience, I think if you can pool your resources together with a couple of mates, you get an awful lot out of the sport, and it just opens doors. Just as Tibbitts is coming back in, I did have a quick story. On my third weekend with the team, we rocked up to a drop zone that was about 2 hours away. None of us had ever been there, but we showed up, and we were the 4-way team. I had 118 jumps, and look at my logbook, I had no jumps. And we were the 4-way team rocking up to this drop zone, and we were showing a lot more respect than any of us deserved. I think that carries having that shared goal and that shared focus, and that you're there to do a job, really carries with it the respect within the skydiving community. And I found that really helped me when I was kind of unsure what I was doing around that 120, 150 jump mark.
It's often nice to have something when you're around that jump mark, to have something that it gives you a reason to turn up the drop zone and a real sense of purpose and a sense of satisfaction in jumping as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, the community keeps us there. I mean, look at this. Look at all these faces. This is awesome. This, even if we're not at the drop zone, the community is what keeps us here.
A really cool person once said to me is, we come to skydive, but we stay for the skydivers.
Absolutely.
All right. Wonderful. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Merv?
No, mate. No, hand it back.
All right, beautiful. Well, next we'd like to talk about some of the other things that you can do, not necessarily directly in jumping, but some of the positions people can take working around jumping. So we'd like to speak to Sara Hogan, who's the chair of the VTPC and also a judge. So Sara?
Hi, everybody. So I'll talk about the APF judge first. So how I got involved in it was Tibbitts, actually. He said you might be interested in it. So get in contact with Gail, who was or is the APF judge person that organises everybody, and get in touch with her and see if it's something you're interested in. And they needed at that time more judges. So I always say yes to opportunities. So I went along to a state championship and watched how everything happens. I never went to a competition before that because I was a really new jumper, so I hadn't seen what happened behind the scenes. It's really cool to learn the sporting code, the dive pools, and understand everything that goes on behind a competition. People spend a lot of time, money and energy in it, so it's good that they have dedicated people that are actually there judging them and actually taking the time and energy to do that. So that's how I got into it. What you have to do to become a judge is I personally did a training course with Gail. I had to read the sporting code, understand the dive pools, which I knew nothing about before entering into that. And then I just did regular training nights with her over 6 months to a year. And then I sat an exam and I was qualified. I think to be a judge is really cool if you want to understand the sporting code and diving pool and understand what judges actually do. If you're a competitor, I would actually highly recommend doing it because you kind of get an idea of why judges judge the way they do, and you might not be so pissed off about some of the calls they might make. It's kind of good to see on both ends why certain calls are made, and you actually might improve your skills as a competitor by seeing that. Or alternatively, you can understand how to object to things in a valid way. And so I think that's a really good thing for a competitive side of thing. For me, I just wanted to be involved in the sport and help my friends because I know they spend a lot of time and money doing that. So that's the judge side of things. In relation to the chair, being a chair of the VTPC, I once again was nominated by Tibbitts. I actually had never attended a meeting before. I didn't know what the VTPC did. I actually had no involvement prior to entering into that role. I gained a lot from being chair. I didn't understand anything about the administrative side of things and what the APF does, which they do a lot, and what the VTP does or any state council do. They actually do quite a lot behind the scenes. I've helped my friends out who are coaches to understand the funding requirements as well. So, and I've also created a lot of safety nights and things like that. The things that I wanted to see when I was a jumper, I have the opportunity now to do that. So we've created safety nights. I've held a lot of webinars because it's the kind of thing that I wanted to see when I was a younger jumper. So I now get to create that and work with the management committee to do that. So I think it's awesome to be involved in the committees, councils, the APF. I think it's really good to get behind the sport. We're all here because we love jumping, but it's good to get people involved because we need those people to be able to keep the sport going. And I think it's really good. People sit around the drop zone a lot and complain about what's happening, but they're not doing anything about it. So I think being part of the committee or the APF is a really good opportunity to have your voice heard and to try and be involved in the process. That's me.
Wonderful, awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, as Sarah says, there's a lot until you start attending local council meetings. I think people don't realize how much goes on there and how much they do and how important it is to have really committed, dedicated, and obviously competent people in their roles. So yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah. You're the best. And then joining us at the next end of the tree is, and obviously Merv in his fourways and stuff like that with his teams is competing. But then the next person we're going to talk to tonight is also a competitor, someone who's been to World Meets, and they're going to talk a little bit about their experience, how they got there, and yeah. So Jason, if you're here, take it away.
Thank you. First of all, I'm going to apologise. I absolutely cooked it tonight, and I'm down at the pub having dinner with friends. So I've had to sneak out to the smoking area, and that's why my screen's all blacked out. So apologies for that. But anyway, here we go. So I guess, where am I? I've been jumping for 8, 9, almost 10 years now. Got into wingsuiting back in 2013, but even before wingsuiting, similar to Merv, I started jumping in Australia in Elderslie. One of the guys, Roger Hugelschoffer, was creating these events, these Australian performance events once a year. And so I turned up to one of these with a tracking suit, and just to see how well I could fly a tracking suit. And that was fun, and that was probably my first introduction to competition. I've been racing dirt bikes and stuff like that for years before that. So bringing some competition into a sport, for me, gave me a bit of direction, gave me a bit of something to aim for. Could I be better than the next person? Got into wingsuiting, did some stuff with Roger around acro competition, and again that was more about learning to fly the wingsuit better, and it gave me a purpose to turn up to the drop zone and fly my wingsuit. How many dots can I get in a jump? How many times can I go around Roger? So we had some really good jumps. Went to nationals. I think it was about 2013 in Tugulawa. This was before wingsuiting acro was a thing in Australia, and tried to hold a trial event. So that was really cool. From there, I guess we went and did a few of the performance runs in my performance in my baby wingsuits. And again, it was more like the tracking. How well could I fly my little wingsuit in comparison to the guys in the big wingsuits? And yeah, it's just about giving myself a purpose in the sport. Went off to Europe, met a whole heap of people over there. It was made a heap of friends, and again, I'm over there, and they're holding a competition in the UK, and I was like, well, let's see how I fly against these guys. And didn't do a whole lot of training for that competition, and ended up somewhere around the 10th mark. So I was like, oh, this is pretty good. That was pretty good. And when I came back to Australia, I'm like, okay, maybe I should see what happens with Australian nationals now, because I've been seeing Luke and Chris, and they're starting to make it into the international scene. I think Luke may have done some of the Red Bull Aces, and he'd gone to a couple of the Worlds and come out in 5th. So I turned up to nationals in the Gambia in 2017, I think it was, just to see how I'd fly with those guys, because I knew where they'd be in the national level or in an international level, and didn't do too bad, and then didn't really think too much about going to the World Cup at that stage. And but at the end of the competition, APF give you a little letter saying you've been invited to join the Australian parachute team, which then kind of opened up some doors and made it real, made it exciting. And so yeah, did a heap of training. Went off to Czech Republic. Yeah, another reason to travel for skydiving, get to see a few more drop zones, get to see your friends that I'd already made a few years before. Rock up there, and it was good fun. It was a different vibe. It was a little bit of a bit of seriousness, a bit of yeah, just seeing how everyone competes in competition. It was awesome. Then I come back and we did the 2018 Nationals, went off to the Worlds in 2019. And again, see the same lot of people over there. You're starting to see the same group of people. You're making friends with all these international wing scooters, and really starting to feel like an international community rather than just a club in the back of Victoria somewhere. The coolest thing I think I've seen in competition was last year in Italy, where the guy from the UK rocks up in a Phantom, the smallest wingsuit you can buy, the beginner wingsuit, the suit that basically everyone starts wingsuiting in, and he's putting it up against everyone in the big race suits, these suits that fly for miles. I think he had 3, maybe 4 chops. He landed off 6 of the 9 jumps. Because we're all going up to 3 or 4 miles past the drop zone. You're not flying a Phantom that far. I don't care how good you are. You're not flying it that far. Lands off, has to get picked up almost every jump. But the guy had the biggest smile on his face. He was there competing, having fun with his friends. It was just fun for him. And I guess what that showed to me was you don't have to go to the Worlds thinking that you're going to win it. You can go to the Worlds just going, I want to have some fun with my friends. With both Czech Republic and Italy, similar to what Jess was saying before about these are individual sports, but you compete in a team. We've got a team. We've got Luke, Chris, we had Stephen last year, and we're traveling around in a rental car, checking out the sites on the off days. We're staying in the same hotels. We're eating meals together and experiencing Prostějov, which is about right in the back end of Czech Republic, nowhere near any kind of real city, tourist-wise. Seeing these sites that are different to everyone else, and we're experiencing it as friends. So I guess that's my story about competing, and yeah.
Kind of all just becomes a great adventure with friends.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyone have any questions for Jason? Man, thanks for joining us, and yeah, thanks for taking just a little bit of time away from Chloe to say that.
Thanks, guys.
All right, cool. So we started out tonight. The purpose of this Zoom meeting was to discuss a little bit of some of the issues around uncurrency and maybe how to avoid it and how to hopefully make a safer foray back into skydiving. And then also to discuss a little bit some of the new rules that have come in, which is buddy checks, and I think particularly the gear compatibility checks. And then we're hoping to reach an audience of younger jumpers with some stories or some pathways that they might be able to immerse themselves deeper into the sport that we're also keen on, and start jumping with a bit of purpose and have some longer term goals. So look, I think we've covered everything we set out to. Does anyone have any questions or comments or feedback they'd like to throw in?
I was going to say, when I did go to the UK to jump over there, it was really cool because they had a system. So they printed out a sheet for everyone that was on the load. And then, so they'll do a buddy check and then tick who was on the load. They'll tick for each other or sign for each other. And then when they landed, they all had to also come back and mark off on that, just so it was really easy to know who landed off the drop zone and stuff. So that was it was really good just to be able to have that someone else checking your gear as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of funny how culturally different drop zones or federations kind of grow up. Like when I first started jumping in the UK, I can't remember if it was every drop zone now, but it was certainly mandatory that you had gear checks whether you're in the little emplaning area. It was a fenced off pen. I remember people would have to initial against your name. You'd have to sign signed back in after you landed and you came back into the drop zone. And, you know, that was 17, 18 years ago now in the UK. And now we're just sort of touching on aspects of that now in Australia. It really is different it really is interesting how things grow up in their own levels of isolation. Anything else from anyone?
We were promised Captain Oates.
Captain Oates, hey buddy. Say hi to the nice people. Oh, he's super tired. He's had a very long day, eating all sorts of things he shouldn't have eaten. It's a tough day being a golden retriever. There you go, Brandon.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Cheers, Mike.
Thanks so much, Tibbitts. Thanks everyone for joining us. And coming up next week, we might be talking with NZ Aerosports and possibly, we'll let you know, and we'll post that on our Facebook and on the e-news on Monday. And it'll be a daytime session. And we'll be chatting with Charles and potentially a couple of CIs who have started up operating, just to see how things are going and any little things that have, since there have some drop zones that have already opened, they might have come up with some issues that have been addressed from this time in uncurrency. So stay tuned for the time. It'll be the same day, just not sure what time, probably, but during the day for that one, I'd say 11 o'clock slot. Thanks again for coming. Thanks, Tibbitts. Thanks, Captain Oates.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.
And thanks everyone else for chatting with us too. Sarah, Merv, Elliot, JD.
And Sara Hogan.
Yes, I said Sarah. She was the first one.
She's so good. She should have a name said twice.